Alice is 57 years old, and for as long as she can remember, travel has been the thread that wove her family together. Whether it was packing up the car for a weekend getaway to the beach or boarding a plane for a 2-week vacation abroad, Alice was always the one who planned every detail. She loved the excitement of flipping through travel brochures, mapping out itineraries, and imagining the smiles on her family's faces when they discovered a new place together. Her husband, Jack, would joke that she had a sixth sense for finding hidden gems, those charming little cafes or scenic overlooks that no guidebook ever mentioned. Their children, Emily and Ben, grew up with suitcases as familiar companions, their childhoods marked by memories of laughter-filled road trips, shared meals at tiny local restaurants, and late-night conversations in hotel rooms. For Alice, those trips weren't just about seeing new places, they were about creating moments that would bind her family closer together. But life, as it often does, changed. 5 years ago, Jack passed away after a brief illness, leaving Alice to navigate a world that suddenly felt quieter and emptier. At first, she threw herself into helping her children adjust to life without their father. Emily had just started her own family, and Ben was building his career in another city. Alice found comfort in being there for them, but as time went on, she began to notice something unsettling. The house felt too big, the days too long, and the silence too heavy. The family trips that once filled her calendar were now replaced by occasional visits from her kids and grandkids. While she cherished those moments, they couldn't fill the void left by the absence of shared adventures. She missed the thrill of planning a journey, the anticipation of discovering something new, and the joy of watching her loved ones experience the world through her eyes. In the quiet hours of the evening, when the house was still and the world outside seemed to pause, Alice would sit at her desk and open a small leather-bound journal. It was a habit she'd started years ago, jotting down notes about places she dreamed of visiting someday. Paris, with its cobblestone streets and iconic Eiffel Tower. Kyoto, with its serene temples and vibrant cherry blossoms. Santorini, with its whitewashed buildings perched above the azure sea. But one destination stood out among the rest: Tuscany, Italy. She had read countless books about its rolling hills dotted with vineyards, its medieval villages steeped in history, and its warm, golden light that seemed to glow in every photograph. Tuscany wasn't just a place on a map for Alice, it was a dream, a symbol of everything she associated with beauty, peace, and adventure. Yet, every time she thought about going, there was always a reason to put it off. Maybe next year, she'd tell herself. When the kids are older. Or when Jack retires. But now, sitting alone in her quiet home, she realized that next year might never come unless she made it happen herself. The thought of traveling alone, however, filled her with both curiosity and apprehension. Alice had spent decades taking care of others, ensuring everyone was comfortable and happy. The idea of stepping out into the world on her own felt foreign and a little frightening. What if she got lost? What if she felt lonely? What if people judged her for traveling alone at her age? These questions lingered in her mind, but so did another, quieter voice. It whispered to her in the stillness of the night, reminding her that she was stronger than she thought. That she deserved to chase her dreams, even if it meant doing it alone. After all, hadn't she spent her entire life putting others first? Maybe it was time to do something just for herself, to rediscover the world and, in the process, rediscover who she was beyond the roles of wife, mother, and grandmother. Alice's journey towards solo travel didn't happen overnight. It began with small, almost imperceptible shifts in her daily life, moments when she allowed herself to dream again. One rainy afternoon, while tidying up her bookshelf, she stumbled upon an old travel magazine she had saved years ago. Its cover featured a breathtaking image of Tuscany, golden fields stretching endlessly under a soft, amber sky, with rows of cypress trees lining the horizon like sentinels guarding a secret paradise. As she flipped through the pages, something stirred within her, a longing she had buried beneath layers of responsibility and routine. She found herself lingering on an article titled "Solo Travel for Seniors: Rediscover Yourself Through Adventure." The words seemed to leap off the page, speaking directly to her heart. At first, the idea of traveling alone felt daunting, even absurd. Alice had always been surrounded by family during her trips. How could she possibly navigate an unfamiliar country without someone by her side? What if she got lost or struggled to communicate in a foreign language? And then there was the fear of judgment. What would her friends think if they knew she was traveling alone at her age? Would they see it as strange or reckless? These doubts swirled in her mind, creating a storm of hesitation. But alongside the fear, there was also a quiet determination growing within her. She realized that she had spent most of her life prioritizing others' needs over her own desires. Wasn't it time to do something just for herself? The turning point came one evening as she sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, reminding her of the Tuscan landscapes she had admired in the magazine. She thought about all the dreams she had set aside, the places she had promised herself she would visit someday. That word echoed in her mind, someday. When exactly was someday? If not now, when? Jack was gone, her children were busy building their own lives, and she was still here, alive and capable. The realization hit her like a wave. She didn't need to wait for permission or company to pursue her dreams. She could take this step on her own. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, Alice decided to take action. She spent hours researching flights, accommodations, and guided tours online. At first, the sheer amount of information felt overwhelming, but she reminded herself that she didn't have to have everything figured out right away. She chose a small, family-run inn nestled in the hills of Tuscany, drawn to its cozy charm and glowing reviews from other travelers. To ease her nerves, she booked a few guided excursions, a wine-tasting tour, a cooking class, and a day trip to Florence, but left plenty of free time to explore at her own pace. Each decision brought her closer to the reality of her trip, and with each click of the confirm button, she felt a little more empowered. Still, there were moments of doubt. One night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she wondered if she was making a mistake. What if she regretted leaving the comfort of her familiar surroundings? What if she felt out of place among younger travelers or couples? But then she remembered something Jack used to say to her whenever she hesitated to try something new: "You're braver than you think, Alice." His voice, though just a memory now, gave her the courage to keep going. She reminded herself that this wasn't just about visiting Tuscany, it was about proving to herself that she was capable of stepping into the unknown, even at 57 years old. As the departure date approached, Alice felt a whirlwind of emotions. There were days when excitement bubbled over, and she couldn't stop talking about her plans to her friends at the community center. Other days, anxiety crept in, and she questioned whether she was truly ready for this kind of adventure. But through it all, she held on to one thought: this is my time. She wasn't traveling to escape her life, she was traveling to embrace it fully, to remind herself that she was more than the roles she had played for so many years. She was Alice, a woman with dreams, curiosity, and the strength to chase them, no matter her age. The morning of her departure arrived with a mix of excitement and nerves that left Alice's hands trembling as she zipped up her suitcase. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, she couldn't shake the feeling that she might have bitten off more than she could chew. Standing at the airport, clutching her boarding pass in a small carry-on bag, she watched families bustling around her, children laughing, couples holding hands, and felt a pang of loneliness. For the first time in decades, she was embarking on a journey without anyone by her side. It was both liberating and terrifying. When the plane finally touched down in Florence, Alice stepped out into the warm Tuscan air, her senses immediately awakened by the sights, sounds, and smells of a place so different from home. The rolling hills she had admired in pictures stretched out before her, dotted with vineyards and olive groves that seemed to glow under the golden sunlight. As she climbed into the shuttle that would take her to her inn, she pressed her face against the window, drinking in every detail. For a moment, her fears melted away, replaced by sheer awe at the beauty surrounding her. Her arrival at the inn was met with warmth and hospitality that instantly put her at ease. Sophia, the innkeeper, greeted her with a wide smile and a gentle hug, welcoming her like an old friend. "You're going to love it here," Sophia said, her voice filled with genuine kindness. Alice felt a wave of relief wash over her. Perhaps this wouldn't be as daunting as she had imagined. Her room was simple yet charming, with terracotta floors, crisp white linens, and a small balcony overlooking the countryside. As she unpacked her belongings, she noticed a handwritten note on the bedside table, "Welcome to Tuscany. May your stay be filled with peace, joy, and discovery." The gesture touched her deeply, reminding her that even in solitude, there was connection to be found. On her first full day in Tuscany, Alice decided to explore the nearby village. Armed with a map and a few phrases she had memorized in Italian, she set out on foot, determined to embrace the adventure ahead. At first, everything felt unfamiliar: the narrow cobblestone streets, the sound of church bells echoing in the distance, the scent of fresh bread wafting from a bakery, but soon, she began to feel a rhythm to the place. She wandered into a small market, where vendors called out cheerful greetings and displayed colorful fruits and vegetables. Though her Italian was far from perfect, she managed to buy a loaf of crusty bread and some local cheese, earning smiles and nods from the shopkeeper. These small interactions reminded her of how universal kindness could be, transcending language barriers and cultural differences. But not everything went smoothly. Later that afternoon, while walking through a vineyard she had spotted earlier, Alice realized she had taken a wrong turn. The path she thought would lead back to the village instead wound deeper into the countryside, leaving her surrounded by rows of grapevines with no clear way out. Panic began to creep in as she scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of civilization. Just as she was about to pull out her phone to call for help, she spotted a figure in the distance, a farmer tending to his crops. Summoning her courage, she approached him and gestured toward the map in her hand. "Mi scusi," she began hesitantly, "I'm lost." To her surprise, the man smiled warmly and pointed her in the right direction, even offering her a handful of freshly picked grapes as a token of goodwill. As she walked away, munching on the sweet fruit, Alice felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the farmer's kindness, but for the lesson she had learned: sometimes, getting lost leads to unexpected moments of connection. By the end of her first day, Alice returned to the inn exhausted but exhilarated. Sitting on her balcony as the sun dipped below the hills, she reflected on everything she had experienced. Yes, there had been moments of uncertainty and discomfort, but there had also been beauty, kindness, and a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. She realized that traveling alone wasn't about being completely self-reliant, it was about learning to trust herself, to lean into the unknown, and to find joy in the little things. For the first time in a long time, Alice felt truly alive. As the days passed, Alice began to settle into a rhythm that felt uniquely her own. Each morning, she woke up early, drawn to the tranquility of the Tuscan countryside before the world stirred to life. She would sit on her balcony with a steaming cup of espresso, watching the sun rise over the hills and listening to the distant chirping of birds. These quiet moments became sacred to her, a time to reflect, breathe deeply, and simply be. Without the distractions of daily responsibilities or the need to accommodate others' schedules, Alice discovered a newfound sense of freedom. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing to meet anyone else's expectations. She was living entirely for herself. One of the most surprising aspects of her trip was how much she enjoyed exploring alone. On her second day, she joined a guided tour of a nearby medieval village perched atop a hill. The guide spoke passionately about the history of the town, pointing out ancient stone buildings and hidden courtyards. At first, Alice felt self-conscious walking among couples and groups, but as the tour progressed, she found herself completely absorbed in the stories being told. She lingered longer than the others at a small chapel adorned with faded frescoes, marveling at the craftsmanship and imagining the lives of the people who had once worshipped there. It was in those quiet, solitary moments that she realized something profound. Traveling alone allowed her to fully immerse herself in the experience without distraction. There was no need to compromise or adjust her pace. She could linger wherever she wanted, soaking in every detail. Her growing confidence encouraged her to venture further on her own. One afternoon, she rented a bicycle and pedaled along a scenic route lined with vineyards and olive groves. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of soil and leaves, and the only sounds were the hum of insects and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. As she rode, Alice felt a sense of exhilaration she hadn't experienced in years. She stopped at a roadside stand selling fresh produce and struck up a conversation with the elderly farmer who ran it. Though their communication was limited by language barriers, they exchanged smiles and gestures, sharing a moment of mutual understanding. The farmer handed her a ripe peach, which she bit into as she continued her ride, the sweetness bursting in her mouth like a reward for her courage. But perhaps the most transformative experience came during a cooking class she attended later in the week. The class was held in a rustic farmhouse kitchen, where a jovial chef taught participants how to make traditional Tuscan dishes like pappardelle al cinghiale, pasta with wild boar sauce, and cantucci, almond biscotti. As Alice worked alongside other travelers, she discovered that several of them were also seniors traveling solo. Among them was Margaret, a 62-year-old woman from Canada who had recently retired and decided to explore Europe on her own. Over glasses of local Chianti, they bonded over their shared experiences of loss, resilience, and rediscovery. Margaret confessed that she had been nervous about traveling alone at first but had quickly come to love the independence it afforded her. "It's not about being lonely," Margaret said with a smile. "It's about finding pieces of yourself you didn't know were missing." These conversations resonated deeply with Alice. She realized that her journey wasn't just about seeing new places, it was about reconnecting with parts of herself she had neglected over the years. Back home, she had always defined herself by her roles: wife, mother, grandmother. Here in Tuscany, she was simply Alice, a woman with dreams, curiosities, and the capacity to grow. She began to see her solo travel not as an act of isolation but as an opportunity for self-discovery. Every decision she made, no matter how small, from choosing which trail to hike to deciding where to have dinner, reinforced her belief in her own strength and resourcefulness. By the end of the week, Alice felt a shift within her. She no longer worried about filling her days with activities or proving anything to herself. Instead, she embraced the simplicity of being present. One evening, she treated herself to dinner at a tiny trattoria tucked away in the village square. Sitting at a table for one, she savored each bite of her meal, a rich risotto infused with truffles, and watched the locals go about their evening routines. Children played tag under the soft glow of streetlights, while older couples strolled arm in arm, exchanging quiet laughter. In that moment, Alice felt a deep sense of contentment. She wasn't lonely, she was whole. And for the first time in a long time, she understood that joy didn't have to come from grand gestures or shared experiences. It could be found in the smallest, most ordinary moments, if only you allowed yourself to notice them. On her final evening in Tuscany, Alice joined a small group of travelers for a stargazing excursion in the countryside. The event had been advertised at her inn as a chance to experience the magic of the Tuscan night sky, and though she initially hesitated, wondering if it would feel awkward to sit among strangers in silence, something about the idea intrigued her. She decided to go, packing a light sweater and a notebook in case inspiration struck. The drive to the stargazing site took them deep into the hills, far from the glow of village lights. When they arrived, the guide led them to a clearing surrounded by olive trees, where blankets and cushions had been laid out on the grass. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky transformed into a canvas of deep indigo, dotted with stars that seemed impossibly bright. Alice lay back on her blanket, gazing upward, and felt a profound sense of awe wash over her. It was as if the vastness of the universe stretched before her, reminding her of how small yet significant her place in it truly was. At first, the group exchanged quiet murmurs, pointing out constellations and sharing stories about their favorite celestial bodies. But as the hours passed, the conversations faded into silence, leaving only the sound of crickets chirping and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. In that stillness, Alice found herself reflecting on everything she had experienced during her trip. She thought about the fear that had gripped her when she first arrived, the worry that she wouldn't belong, that she'd feel out of place or overwhelmed. And yet, here she was, lying under a blanket of stars, feeling more connected to herself and the world around her than she had in years. As she stared up at the heavens, Alice's mind drifted to memories of Jack. She remembered the nights they used to spend sitting on their porch, talking about their dreams for the future. They had always planned to visit Europe together, but life, and then illness, had gotten in the way. For so long, she had carried those unfulfilled plans like a weight, believing that traveling without him would somehow diminish their meaning. But now, under the infinite expanse of stars, she realized something important. Jack wasn't gone because she was here. His love lived on in every step she took, every moment she embraced, and every dream she pursued. This trip wasn't a betrayal of their shared past, it was an extension of it, a way of honoring the life they had built together by continuing to live fully. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, for the life she had lived, for the courage she had found within herself, and for the beauty of this moment. She whispered softly into the night, "Thank you, Jack. Thank you for giving me the strength to do this." It was a private moment, one no one else could hear, but it felt like a conversation nonetheless, a bridge between her past and her present, between loss and renewal. When the guide announced it was time to head back, Alice lingered for a few moments longer, reluctant to leave the serenity of the clearing. As she stood and brushed the grass from her sweater, she noticed Margaret standing nearby, also lost in thought. Without speaking, they exchanged a knowing smile, one that conveyed understanding, solidarity, and perhaps even a little pride. In that silent exchange, Alice felt a deep sense of connection, not just to Margaret, but to everyone who had ever dared to step into the unknown. The ride back to the inn was quiet, each traveler absorbed in their own reflections. When Alice returned to her room, she sat down at the small desk and opened her notebook. She began writing a letter, not to anyone in particular, but to herself. In it, she poured out her thoughts, her fears, and her triumphs. She wrote about the doubts that had almost kept her from taking this trip, the moments of joy she had discovered along the way, and the realization that solitude wasn't something to fear. It was a space where growth happened, where dreams took root, and where peace could be found. As she closed the notebook and placed it gently on the bedside table, Alice felt a profound shift within her. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived in Tuscany just a week ago. That Alice had been hesitant, unsure, and burdened by the weight of her responsibilities. This Alice was braver, freer, and more alive. She had faced her fears, embraced the unknown, and discovered a part of herself she didn't know existed. And as she climbed into bed, lulled by the soft hum of cicadas outside her window, she knew one thing for certain: this journey was only the beginning. When Alice stepped off the plane and back into the familiar surroundings of her hometown, she felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, she was relieved to be home, to see her cozy house, sleep in her own bed, and reunite with her children and grandchildren. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had shifted. Tuscany wasn't just a destination she had visited, it was a turning point, a place where she had rediscovered parts of herself she thought were lost forever. As she unpacked her suitcase, carefully folding the clothes she had worn and placing souvenirs on her dresser, she realized that the journey hadn't ended when she boarded the flight back. It was still alive within her, shaping the way she saw the world and herself. Her family noticed the change almost immediately. When her daughter Emily came over for dinner a few days later, she remarked, "Mom, you seem different. Happier, somehow." Alice smiled, running her fingers over the rim of her coffee mug as she thought about how to explain. "I think I am," she said finally. "Being in Tuscany reminded me of who I used to be before life got so busy. And now I feel like I've brought a little piece of that back with myself." Emily listened intently as Alice shared stories from her trip, the vineyards, the cooking class, the stargazing night, and could see the sparkle in her mother's eyes. It was a look she hadn't seen in years, one that spoke of confidence, curiosity, and quiet joy. But the changes weren't just internal. Alice found herself approaching everyday life with a renewed sense of purpose. She started waking up earlier to take long walks around her neighborhood, savoring the crisp morning air and noticing details she had overlooked before: the way sunlight filtered through the trees, the sound of birds chirping, the friendly wave of a neighbor passing by. She joined a local book club, something she had considered doing for years but never quite mustered the courage to try. To her surprise, she quickly formed meaningful connections with the other members, many of whom were also navigating life after retirement or the loss of a spouse. Their conversations often turned to travel, and Alice found herself eagerly sharing tips and encouragement, urging them to chase their own dreams. One afternoon, while flipping through photos from her trip, Alice had an idea. She decided to start a small blog called Solo Steps: Adventures After 50. At first, she hesitated. What did she know about blogging? Would anyone even read it? But then she remembered the lessons she had learned in Tuscany, that taking risks, no matter how small, could lead to unexpected rewards. So she sat down at her computer and began typing. Her first post was simple yet heartfelt, recounting her decision to travel alone, the challenges she faced, and the profound sense of fulfillment she discovered along the way. She ended the post with these words: "Life doesn't stop when you grow older. Sometimes, it's only just beginning. Traveling alone taught me that I am stronger, braver, and more capable than I ever imagined. And if I can do it, so can you." To her astonishment, the response was overwhelming. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers reached out to share their own stories and express gratitude for her honesty and vulnerability. Some confessed they had been hesitant to travel solo but felt inspired to give it a try. Others thanked her for reminding them that it's never too late to pursue a dream. Reading their messages filled Alice with a deep sense of fulfillment. She realized that her journey wasn't just about personal growth, it was about inspiring others to take their own steps toward adventure and self-discovery. As weeks turned into months, Alice continued to embrace her newfound independence. She signed up for an art class, something she had always wanted to do but never made time for. She volunteered at a community garden, finding joy in nurturing plants and connecting with fellow volunteers. And she began planning her next trip, not to Tuscany this time, but to Kyoto, Japan, a place she had dreamed of visiting for years. Each decision, no matter how small, reinforced her belief that life was meant to be lived fully, regardless of age. Looking back on her journey, Alice knew that traveling alone had changed her in ways she couldn't have anticipated. It wasn't just about seeing new places, it was about learning to trust herself, embracing solitude as a source of strength, and discovering that happiness could be found in the simplest moments. She often thought about the stars she had gazed at on her final night in Tuscany, their light stretching across millions of miles to reach her. In a way, those stars mirrored her own journey, vast, unpredictable, and infinitely beautiful. And just like them, she realized she still had so much light left to shine.